Okay, so here at Cynical Who, we've recently been busy celebrating the 15th anniversary of Series 1 and Doctor Who's successful revival. Please make sure to check out our weekly commentaries of every episode if you haven't already, there's a good chap. But of course, there's also been another key anniversary at the same time that is equally worth celebrating, and that is the 10th anniversary of Series 5, the first to feature Matt Smith as the Doctor and to be written and run chiefly by Stephen Moffat. Now, while we prefer Series 1 to Series 5 due to it being far more consistent, that is not to say Series 5 should be swept under the carpet and dismissed altogether. Far from it. It has its lesser episodes, but even those are pretty enjoyable romps. I've lost count of the number of times I've watched Victory of the Daleks, for instance. Matt Smith nails it immediately as the Doctor with a perfect balance between whimsy and authority, while Moffat struck a perfect balance between old and new, successfully rebooting the show and giving it fresh air, while still making it feel like Doctor Who. The risk was high given how popular the programme had become under David Tennant and Russell T Davies, not to mention that this was the first big reboot since the Kraken reawoke in 2005. With that in mind, while some did unavoidably switch off after Tennant left, the risk paid off beautifully from a creative perspective. For many people, particularly across the pond in America, this was their introduction to Doctor Who, and the show's most well-regarded episodes, such as the 11th Hour and Vincent and the Doctor, have helped re-cement the show's status as a global phenomenon, changed lives, and even helped people cope with some dark times in their lives. So, as Series 5 is now 10 years old, I thought it would be an appropriate opportunity to go through each and every story from the series, because, well, I'm sure you all want to know what my opinion is on each story. You do, right? Okay, well, first up, we have the 11th Hour, and it is, as you're all probably aware, pretty awesome. The way in which the 11th Doctor and Amy Pond are introduced is simply genius, a perfect emphasis of the show's new fairy tale aesthetic, as well as an effective display of the possibilities of time travel. Matt Smith nails the part with his first lines, which is more than could be said for the likes of other Doctors. Even Christopher Eccleston's first line, for instance, was pretty generic. Anyway, while I'd ultimately recommend other episodes for the uninitiated, the 11th Hour is a decent opener, definitely combining comedy and character drama, whilst not forgetting to put effort into the alien Fred subplot, which is inevitably somewhat sidelined to give way to the main characters, but engaging nevertheless. A great start. Then we have two episodes which formed the second filming block of Series 5, which Stephen Moffat later said in interviews he deprioritised in favour of Block 1, something he claimed to now regret. But actually, for episodes 2 and 3, Series 5's offerings are not that bad. They're not flawless standout highlights, of course, but they aren't terrible either. In fact, I find them very watchable. With The Beast Below, for instance, Moffat had intended to show how the Doctor needs a companion, and he reasonably succeeds in demonstrating this in an episode which has nice poetic ideas and concepts to boot, and quite a lot of them at that. Starship UK, the Smilers, the Crofairs, and brilliant chemistry and dialogue for the Doctor and Amy. For a middle-of-the-run episode, it's very good. As for Victory of the Daleks, I do concede that turning the Daleks into an LGBT rainbow flag was probably a stupid idea. I don't mind them looking bigger and more tank-like. If they'd been painted the gunmetal grey colour like the Daleks of old, they'd look pretty imposing and intimidating, and I wouldn't have a problem with them. But my biggest problem with the redesigned Daleks is actually how the show just gave up on them in response to the backlash they received, going back to a design that, while great, was looking old by then, instead of just giving the Daleks the simple repaint that would have made them perfect. But I digress. Anyway, the episode itself, it's a nice piece of throwaway fun. It is incredibly daft and not a standout, essentially being a deliberate homage to Power of the Daleks, but not working quite as well, being rushed in places and not giving the Daleks much material. But I used to watch this to death when it came out on DVD, and despite all its flaws, I did enjoy it, and I still do to an extent. So there. Then The Time of Angels, a two-part story that marks the return of the Weeping Angels and River Song. Given how the previous story to feature the Weeping Angels is regarded as one of the greatest ever episodes of Doctor Who in general, and how Silence in the Library, which introduced River Song, is possibly my all-time favourite Who story, there was a lot riding on this sequel, so thank God it didn't mess up. Mirroring the progression from the film Alien to the more action-orientated sequel Aliens, the story introduces new captivating elements of information about the angels. They can hijack images, they can snatch dead people's voices, they can take over people, they laugh sadistically. With the exception perhaps of that bit when we see the angels move, all of these new tidbits of development never feel like they're straying too far. I'm too busy having fun to feel like the mystery of the angels has been marred in any way. I love the stark contrast to Blink, but most of all, I love how, as so many people have already said for the last decade, this was the first story filmed, yet Matt Smith and Karen Gillan feel like they've been there for years, their performances being confident and assured throughout. I mean, not even that weird ending with Amy trying to seduce the Doctor can ruin things. Fuck it, it's funny. The Vampires of Venice next, and I don't have too much to say about it. It's fine, though not my favourite script from Toby Whithouse. Arthur Darvill slips in very well. It's a nice combination of sci-fi history and gothic fantasy motifs. But I'm more interested in Amy's Choice. Can we get onto that now, please? Ah, there we are, Amy's Choice, an episode that I have watched to death, that is far better than it has any right to be, given it's supposedly a middle-of-the-run episode by the writer of sitcom Men Behaving Badly. The scenario of dream worlds that could be real or fake is a great idea. Toby Jones gives a brilliantly intimidating performance as the Dream Lord. The resolution doesn't feel like a cheat and allows some beautiful character development. Oh, I really like this one. Do I need to justify it? Can I not just say it's great and move on? Another two-parter follows, and it's written by Chris Chibnall. Now, given our reservations on this channel about the Chibnall era, you might be expecting me to place the Hungry Earth in a cannon and fire it off a cliff and into the sea, but no. See, Chibnall was a fine writer when he was writing stories for the middle of a series, and the Hungry Earth works on these terms as it was supposed to. The Silurians, which are making their new Who debut here, are introduced well despite their being drastically different, and the central idea of the Doctor attempting to broker a peace treaty between humans and Silurians is done decently enough, with Matt Smith perfectly displaying the Doctor's desperate hope despite the plan inevitably being doomed to fail. The story is a bit simplistic, yes, and there's the usual Chibnall tropes, such as not one, but two arbitrary countdowns that seem to pass a bit too slowly. But like I said, it works as a middle-of-the-run story, and its shock ending means that it flows quite well into the final quarter of Series 5. This two-part story is followed by Vincent and the Doctor, which seems to have quietly become one of the most loved stories of this era, and it's not hard to see why. Stephen Moffat recalled that he was somewhat concerned when Richard Curtis came in with the idea of doing a Doctor Who story about depression, but the risk pays off beautifully in the episode because it explores the mental torment of Vincent van Gogh very sympathetically, with the subject matter never feeling tacked on or rushed. I love how the monster is under the surface, inspired by Van Gogh's depression, and I also would like to draw attention to the excellent production values on display here, particularly with the sets, which were built as a real labour of love to Van Gogh's paintings and the locations they capture. Tony Curran's excellent as Van Gogh, by the way. The final scene doesn't move me to tears like it has done for so many others, but it does come close. So well done to all involved. Then we have The Lodger, and I must confess I've not watched this one a lot. The Doctor being stranded and forced to live an entirely human and domestic life is a nice idea. In fact, it's a bit of a shame we had to have the pointless alien threat tacked on, which I'm afraid I can't remember a lot about. But I do remember this being a decent romp though, with some fine moments of comedy, and it's nice to have a more subdued and contained episode amongst all the large-scale space operas, particularly the two-part finale to Series 5, which follows this episode. You may be aware how John Pertwee's first series of Doctor Who in 1970 was nearly the last, an incidentally happy 50th birthday to stories such as Spearhead from Space and Inferno. But if they hadn't been successful in the ratings, then Inferno would have been the last Doctor Who story ever. I can't see it either, but let's imagine that the Series 5 finale, The Big Bang, was in a similar position. Imagine that Series 5 had also been a case of make or break, and the BBC decided to cancel the show altogether due to falling ratings. The Big Bang would have actually been a neat emotional way of ending the show, especially with that scene near the end with the Doctor, having restarted the universe, saying goodbye to Amelia Pond, and then walking into the crack in time to be erased from history. Spoiler. I'm not saying I would have preferred it that way, But this story always struck me as having the feel of an ending of some sort, which personally felt nice, if a little odd for the first phase of a bold new era. Probably just me, but that aside, the Big Bang is very enjoyable, and it's just occurred to me how impressive its scope is, what with it beginning in Rome and Britain, before morphing into a much larger scenario with very high stakes. There's some excellent comedy moments, River Song shooting the Doctor's fez, all that time travel farce in the second half, the Doctor reacting to the shock return of Rory Williams, and of course River Song vandalising the oldest cliff in the universe because the Doctor wouldn't answer his phone. Perhaps my favourite ever gag in the history of Doctor Who, although the competition is tight and it didn't work as well when it was repeated in Let's Kill Hitler the following year. But I digress. There were so many iconic moments here that immediately became a sort of zeitgeist. The 11th Doctor introduced a previously obscure piece of fashion wear, the fez, to a generation of children who'd previously never seen such a weird sort of hat, but could then be seen wearing it at Doctor Who-related events for years afterwards. Then there's that underrated cliffhanger ending to the first half, the 11th Doctor's excellently delivered speech at Stonehenge or Foamhenge, the set design, I love the look of the Pandorica and the aforementioned Foamhenge, and on top of that we get to see all the big name villains of Doctor Who, and the Hoiks, join forces. It's like Doomsday on steroids. So many great moments at a time when Moffat's convoluted plot arcs and ways of telling stories hadn't become too convoluted. The plot arc of Series 5 concerning the Crack in Time strikes a perfect balance between simple and complex, and is neatly tied up here. Oh, did I mention that this story is a great conclusion to the series? So, those were my incoherent and blabbering thoughts on every episode of Series 5. All in all, it's a decent series on its own terms, with all of its stories being just that at the very least. As I said at the start of this video, when you consider the huge pressure on the new production team to not cock it up, it's amazing that they didn't. For me, Matt Smith's performance was fully formed at the start, and while I didn't like how the character became perhaps slightly too bubbly on occasions in later series, the 11th Doctor never lost the ability to be the stern, authoritative and moody figure when he needed to be. In fact, he might just be my favourite Doctor, although that's a question I never wish to have an answer to, and if I did, Peter Capaldi would be very close. But anyhow, Series 5 gave us a brilliant Doctor, and a head writer who, while not as consistent as his predecessor, could still write excellent dialogue and jokes, not to mention very engaging and relatable characters in his sleep. Series 5 was the beginning of all this, my friends. One of my favourite eras of Doctor Who, and the one that holds arguably the most nostalgia for me, started here. And that is a cause for celebration. So thank you for watching this far, you're very polite. I hope you found what little I had to say entertaining, if a bit unoriginal. Please consider supporting Cynical Who by liking and sharing the video, or by subscribing to this channel. Look out for the rest of our Series 1 commentaries, which will be released weekly every Thursday until June the 18th. For now though, it's goodbye. Ah, there we are, Amy's Choice, an episode that I have watched to death, and there's the phone, great timing.